Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at how we can use the XML Serializer, which is part of the system.xml namespace, to reduce the amount of effort and code needed to convert an XML document to an object model, as well as how to convert an object model to an XML document. You'll find that using the XML Serializer is extremely useful, especially if you've ever had to do things like grab data out of an XML document, or maybe even generate an XML document from data that you have within your system. I have an XML document here that is our template, and this is just as an example document. It obviously can be anything you want, and it's got things like a patient ID, first name, last name, middle name, date of birth. I've embedded an address information here as well. What I want to do is start off by showing you how you might grab data out of this document and populate an object model if you are not using the serializer. Now, this line here, all this really does is it pulls my XML document, which is embedded into my assembly, out of my assembly as a XML document. This just saves me time and having to hand create this document. So if you're doing this manually, what you have to do is either create your XML document or have it given to you, create an instance of your object that you want to populate, and then go through and populate every individual property and element within your object model one by one. And in our case here, do things like null checking. You'd have to do type checking and all that fun stuff. And just amounts to a ton of code and a ton of energy. If we can use the XML Serializer, we can save tons and tons of code and lots of energy and effort. And we'll get started right now and show you how you can do that. First thing I want to do is I want to create a little test here that will just show us how we can do these various things. Now, the first thing I want to do here is actually want to create. I want to grab our XML document, so we'll borrow some code from above. And then I've already got a class over here called Serializer, so I'll call this var builder. I'll create an instance of my serializer. Now, the first thing I want to do is actually want to grab some data out of my serializer. What I want to do is I want to say, given a patient object and this XML document, return me back a populate instance of that patient. So I'll do something like builder dot create object from document. And I'm going to have to create this real quick, so we don't actually have this method right now. Now I want this to return me back patient. And so in order to do this, it's not a whole lot of energy or a whole lot of work. First thing I need to do is grab an instance of my serializer. And so I'm going to do XML Serializer. And we're going to do type of patient. And that will allow me to create an instance of my serializer. Now, because I'm having the XML document passed in, I actually need to read this into a string reader or any kind of text reader for that matter. So we've now created my string reader. In order to deserialize, all I need to do now is do var entity, do value, serializer dot deserialize, and we'll take our reader, and we'll return our entity. We need to cast it as a patient because deserializer returns simply an object, so we need to actually turn this back as a patient. And that's all I need to do. This to understand how to map our document to our object model, I need to actually sprinkle some attributes onto our object model. So let's go over here and take a look. I've got an instance of my patient here, and as you can see, patient is a class and has a patient ID, a last name, an array of addresses. And then because the XML serialization namespace has some attributes that you can add on to your object model to set markers, we need to do that. Now here, I'm saying that this is an XML root. XML root basically defines what this is. And in my case, I'm actually saying the element name is item, because if you look back at my document, this is item, not patient. If this was patient, I wouldn't have to actually sprinkle this attribute onto my class name. It would just understand based on the name of my class on what element to find, but because they're different, I do have to put this there. Then here I'm going to provide the element marker on each of my properties. I'm going to say that it's a patient ID. I've just created some constants that map up to here. That way I don't have to type these things over and over again, possibly. I'm going to say it's a data type event. And by providing this data type, it'll actually throw an exception if my data type is not an int, which is something I want. So it gives me some way to do some validation. Now I'm going to do the same thing here, providing last name as string. And then down here, actually, I'm going to say that I have an array of addresses. And so as I have an XML element that comes up has a name of addresses, it'll actually build that entire thing. And of course, in order to do that, I need to have an address class that has all the appropriate attributes attached to it as well. So you need to do this in order to have your XML map directly, backwards and forwards. So we've created our test. Let's see if this actually works. So return back the document from us. Let's put a breakpoint right here. Let's run this bad boy. Let's step into this. So I'm going to create a serializer of my type patient. And I have that. I'm going to read my document into a string reader, and that worked. I'm going to step over and deserialize my reader into an object model. And if you look in here, I have last name of Smith, patient ID 123, and actually it did deserialize everything correctly for me. And I can return this back. And now I have a fully populated XML, or object that was built from my object model, or my XML document. That's pretty cool. Now what I want to show you real quick is if you happen to spell something wrong. So let's say we won't do that. Let's say that we change patient ID, and we'll hard code this to test. If I rerun this, those magic strings, if they don't match one-to-one to an element within your document, to your node on your object model, they actually will, instead of throwing an exception, just simply won't map to it. So if I come over here, patient ID is 0, so that I didn't actually populate my patient ID. I just wanted to make you aware of that. Now that I've created my object model from XML document, the next thing I probably want to do is have the ability to create an XML document from my object model. So we can actually do that as well. So let's do builder, and we'll do create XML. We'll do create XML document from object. We'll provide this as a document, and we need to go ahead and create this as well. So let's bounce over and create this. We want to return this as the next document. Now to do the reverse, it's not much different than doing, going from an object to an XML document isn't much different than going from an XML document to an object. First thing I do is do value serializer. Need to create a new XML serializer, same as we did before. And I'm going to need to create a new instance of a string writer, because we need to actually be able to read the serialized object model or a document into a string writer, so that we can later parse that into an XML document. Now I'm going to do serialize.serialize. Now I'll provide this my string writer, and then my patient document. And now we'll return back this string writer with data in it. So the next thing I need to do is do return and I just want to read out the contents of my XML document and let the string writer, which is an XML document, and let the X document parse that for me. So let's run this and see what happens. Step over this, make sure I have a populated document. And I do. If I step over this, now I should have a populated XML document. In fact, if I hover over this and look at it in the XML visualizer, you'll see I have a fully populated XML document. Now notice that because I had the attribute on my patient ID is marked as test. I actually created an XML node named called test, so that's something you need to be careful of. Now, the one last thing I just want to show you is if you're going to be doing this within your application, it's highly likely you'll be doing it on many different object types, and it's probably not practical that you will want to create a separate method for each one. So let's take a look at how we can use generics to simplify this. I'm going to type this with type T, and I'm going to leave this there, and I'm going to say type of T. I'm actually going to have it return a T as well. And here I can mark this as T as well. So now I've taken this from being a explicit of patient usage to now it will take an attempt to convert the XML document to a given type. And I can do the same thing down here. And now I've created generic methods that will serialize and deserialize any object into an XML document backwards and forwards. So I hope you learned something today on how you can use the XML Serializer to reduce the amount of pain and energy needed to read data into and out of an XML document and into your object model. And until next time.